What's on the agenda today? What are you doing in there? Jack in. Huh? I said Jack in. Oh, that's right. Every genre has its Godfather, the book that people look back to and largely agree helped shape the genre into what it is. For modern fantasy, it's Lord of the Rings. For modern science fiction, it's Dune. The one I'm going to talk about today is one of the founding fathers of cyberpunk, littered with plenty of things you will find are commonplace in the genre. It is directly responsible for the terminology of cyberspace and jacking it. Is it still worth a read in this day and age though? An age where the genre has expanded more than ever, popularized by things like Ghost in the Shell and Cyberpunk 2077. The short answer is, of course it is. I think generally it is always important to look at defining works of genres, but even if you look past that, you will find Neuromancer still holds up and it's an enjoyable read. Welcome to A Skeleton's Library. Today, I'm going to give my review and thoughts on Neuromancer. Case was the sharpest data thief in the Matrix, until he crossed the wrong people and they crippled his nervous system, finishing him from cyberspace. Now, a mysterious new employer has recruited him for a last chance run at an unthinkably powerful artificial intelligence, a dead man riding shotgun, and Molly, a mirror-eyed street samurai, to watch his back. Case is ready for the adventure that upped the ante on an entire genre of fiction. If you have any experience with the cyberpunk genre, at least a good bit of Neuromancer's description probably has some bit of familiarity to you. I decided to read Neuromancer as my next book due to hearing about a TV adaptation on Apple TV being in the works. I wanted to know the story so I could watch it when it comes out and see how good of an adaptation it is. Now, I'm not too much of an expert in the genre. The main things that I've experienced are Blade Runner, the Cyberpunk 27 video game, and the anime, and Season 1 of Altered Carbon. Per usual, I'm going to start with my general feelings, avoiding any major spoilers, then provide a warning when I get into specifics. The start of Neuromancer immediately grabbed me, starting with one of my favorite opening lines in any book. The sky above the port was the color of television, tuned to a dead channel. This is already a line that can be interpreted in different ways, depending on what kind of TV you think of. But personally, I found myself instantly thinking of the one Gibson intended, that black and white static that seems to burn itself into your corneas and ears when you turn to it as a child. This opening line instantly became one of my favorites, setting the tone of the novel perfectly in my eyes. Gibson in general has excellent prose in this book, putting paragraphs in a way that perfectly transcribes the feeling to the reader. From early on in the novel that stuck with me, as Case was picking up his beer, one of those strange instances of silence descended, as though 100 unrelated conversations had simultaneously paused at once. Reading this instantly had me imagining this exact feeling from the times I had felt it in my life. Gibson could have gotten the same general point across had he just stopped at descended, but by continuing with the second half, he made me recall that specific feeling myself, transporting me into the scene in a much more visceral way. The other example goes as follows. Night City was a deranged experiment in social Darwinism, designed by a bored researcher who kept one thumb permanently on the fast forward button. Stop hustling and you sank without a trace, but move a little too swiftly and you break the fragile surface tension of the black market. Either way, you were gone. Nothing left of you but some vague memory in the mind of a fixture like rats, though heart or lung or kidneys might survive in the service of some stranger with new yen for the clinic tanks. Gibson's description of the city here instantly communicated to me the concrete jungle nature of the city, the gentle brutality of its delicate ecosystem, and how this was a world where it was hard to hunt, but easy to drown. It also had me imagining the city in a Sims-like simulation, when you put it on fast forward and watch your Sims bustle around the place. To bounce off the subject of prose though, language is a big part of this book, specifically the type of language that defines every generation, slang. This book is filled with stylistic slang and descriptions. It is essentially a whole new little language. It honestly made me recall my time reading Clockwork Orange for the first time. It did not feel nearly as much as a fish out of water with Neuromancer. A giant part of this is due to my time with the game Cyberpunk 2077, which had already taught me about a lot of the same concepts and similar slang as Neuromancer, paired with visuals. Now, even with this experience, I did have to read some paragraphs and sentences multiple times to make sure I grasped some of the ideas Gibson or the characters were communicating. It did not have anything too insane or challenging though. Speaking of Cyberpunk 2077, anyone familiar with the video or tabletop game has probably already noticed one of Neuromancer's influences on it, Night City. So of course, the Night City of Neuromancer is a different place from the Night City of Cyberpunk. Another thing in Neuromancer that made me think of the game was the idea and use of a personality construct in the plot. Johnny Silverhand for Cyberpunk 2077, and Dixie Flatline in Neuromancer. Of course, the way these constructs are used in the story are vastly different along with their personalities. The introduction of Dixie and his little storyline just had me fondly remembering my time with Silverhand in the game. I really like Case, the protagonist of Neuromancer. I have a fondness for protagonists who stray from the typical hero archetype. Him being a burnt out junkie added a lot to his complexity alongside his reoccurring self-loathing. Molly was also a joy, but I felt she was a bit one-note at first. The story she relays later on in the novel added a lot more layers to her and made me really invested in where she would end up. Another thing Gibson does well is communicating the inhuman creepiness with the main AI of the novel. Maybe it has something to do with the state of our world now, with AI becoming a more prevalent thing, but I found a lot of scenes involving it in the novel felt almost like horror scenes, and I wonder if the show will be able to communicate that same unsettling nature. I also liked how many locations we see in the novel. They hop around locations a good bit, rather than being restrained to just one city, which is something I'm more used to with the genre. It made it feel a bit more refreshing, which is funny, considering it is one of the foundational works of the genre. The book also does well at setting stakes pretty early, and showcasing just how far things can go to get this heist done. This is a dog-eat-dog world, and the novel effectively shows that, in multiple intervals. I also enjoyed how much of the book was just set up for the main heist. It being such a big job, I like that we did not just hop to it pretty fast. It really added to the tension and the feeling of importance when the characters finally get to that point. Now to get to some of my general dislikes of the story. There are a couple characters that I felt were pretty wasted. 3 pretty big characters come to mind. They do major things but just don't feel fleshed out nearly enough, especially when 2 of them become antagonistic forces. One gets written out pretty immediately, the second they become antagonistic, despite this turn being hinted at throughout the novel, making that build-up just collapse instantaneously as the character is gone as quick as he was brought in. The other character is disappointing in that I could see them being a very compelling character. You see hints of it, and they are very easy to hate. You just don't get to spend enough time with them to really get invested in their predictable turn and downfall. The last character I wanted more of, just because I started to really like him during the last third of the novel, but we really do not get to see enough of them. All in all, it feels like outside the main 2 or 3 characters, a lot of the characters that pop up in this novel end up feeling a bit surface level or have hints of complexity that we just do not get to see further into. I also felt like you do not get enough cyberspace in the novel, considering that the protagonist is a cyberspace runner, and a big part of the heist involves it. The conflict for the cyberspace portion is pretty easily solved without trouble, most of the tension and focus being on the stuff happening in the real world. Another big thing for me was that there just wasn't ever a definitive antagonistic force that felt like it was the big bad of the novel that could actually stop our characters. You get characters or organizations that feel like they might be that, but when those moments come, things get resolved pretty fast. The closest I felt to a compelling force that could be a definitive antagonist for the novel was the AI. And even then, that doesn't really go anywhere. There's also some stuff with Xeon and how Gibson characterizes the Rastafarian nation and people. It feels very stereotypical and superficial most of the time. He also writes their characters with that Rastafarian accent, leading to some reading that can feel uncomfortable and a bit challenging at times. Ultimately, these portrayals feel more ignorant and superficial rather than hateful. It feels like a topic he should have researched and fleshed out more. If these sort of things do bother you a good bit though, that's your heads up to be ready, or to just avoid the novel if that's too much for you. Lastly, the ending does feel pretty tacked on and sped through. Almost and then they lived happily ever after type situation. I wish we had gotten a more in-depth conclusion and learn more about how some characters and situations ended up, rather than a couple pages of quick summaries. That's going to be the end of the more general, non-spoiler section. If you want to avoid spoilers, it would be best to leave now. Read Neuromancer if you have any interest in the cyberpunk genre, or just defining pieces of literature in general. Now, we jump into specifics that stood out to me. Last warning to leave is now. To get back to Case, really like how flawed of a character he is, and how the novel introduces him when he is at the bottom of the barrel. He is a junkie and a killer, but still not any type of warrior. Even early on when he prepares himself for a fight with the Cobra Whip, he immediately fizzles out and chooses to run instead. I also really liked how even with his body fixed and largely modified, not be able to get high, he still remains an addict through and through, and finds ways to indulge in his vices. This of course pairs well with his self-loathing that becomes a reoccurring sentiment brought up in the novel. The characterization of Case that stuck with me the most is in this page from the novel. Closing his eyes, he felt for that knot of rage, the pure small coal of his anger. It was there still. Where had it come from? He remembered feeling only a kind of bafflement at his maiming in Memphis. Nothing at all when he'd killed to defend his dealing interests in Night City, and a slack sickness and loathing after Linda's death under the inflated dome. But no anger. Small and far away on the mind screen, a semblance of the ants struck a semblance of an office wall in an explosion of brains and blood. He knew then the rage had come in the arcade, when Wintermute rescinded the sim-stim ghost of Linda Lee, inking away the simple animal promise of food, warmth, and a place to sleep. He hadn't become aware of it until his exchange with the hollow construct of Lonnie's own. It was a strange thing. He couldn't take its measure. Numb, he said. He'd been numb a long time. Years. All his nights down in Ninsei. His nights with Linda. Numb in bed, and numb at the cold, sweating center of every drug deal. And now he'd found this warm thing. This chip of murder. Meat, some Barvam said. It's the meat talking. Ignore it. I think this is the page I'd show someone if they wanted to know about the character of Case. It's a part I found myself reading multiple times when I got to it, really letting it soak in. I also like that this rage does not really lead anywhere still. Case doesn't snap. He does not get to complete some variant of vengeance or find an outlet. It largely just burns away. The closest thing to it being when he yells at 3 Jane to convince her to give them the password. To speak of the password quickly, I do like that the novel does not actually state what the magic word is. It's a nice bit of mystery for the audience, almost making us feel like the AI who cannot know the word. I really liked the stories that Molly told of her past, with the puppet house and her ex-love. It added a lot of much needed depth to her character, but up to that point I had felt was fairly one note. Without those stories, I would not have been nearly as invested in her fate during the final heist, or with the fact that she just leaves at the end. I had a problem at first with how fast Case and Molly's relationship goes. After thinking about the world they inhabit and the characters themselves, it ceased being an issue to me, especially considering it really ends up going nowhere in the end. Now, to get back to another point I made earlier about the novel setting stakes, I felt the first little heist did a really good job at showing how bloody things could easily get in order to get their objectives done. Is that in some super stealthy mission where no one gets hurt? People have died to get to this point, and they will continue to do so if necessary. It fits the brutal nature of the world well, especially when they reveal later on Wintermute full-on killed a kid for a part of its plans. Speaking of Wintermute, it is easily the most unsettling thing in a novel, and the closest to feeling like something of a titular antagonist. I really enjoyed its scenes, from the creepy phone calling to the nightmare in cyberspace simulations. Even the controlling of other robots made it feel like this terrifying, like entity. I never felt like it truly had a personality. Gibson did very well at communicating that this thing is beyond human. Then the contrast that the novel does very well at how it balances the Dixie construct. It feels almost just human enough, but still has those uncanny moments that make you remember it is just wrong. Like how its laugh sends a chill down Case's spine, or when it full on admits it isn't sentient, and says how it couldn't write a poem, though Wintermute might be able to. I also really enjoyed how even though it wasn't actually sentient, the personality of Dixie was still strong enough on it to know it would want to be erased. Armitage and Riviera were the main two characters I was referring to when I mentioned antagonistic forces that I wish we had gotten more of. Armitage is pretty built up throughout the novel. It focuses a lot on his empty eyes and the madman that lurks beneath. All this just for him to get shot out into space almost the second he finally snaps free. It just felt very anticlimactic, especially with how much the novel focuses on him, his backstory, and how his old self will eventually come out. I wish either it had been more of a confrontation with him, or that they hadn't built up the turn so much just for it to be gone instantly. Riviera feels like a fascinating character waiting to happen. He has the lizard-like charm and personality, the messed up backstory, everything to make a great villain and character. He's just not in the book enough. I wish we had spent more time with him, especially since he was part of the crew, to see more of his dynamics and personality, and to build up that putrid rivalry with him and Molly. The show he pulls on her with her at its center is very effective, but it feels very extreme and out of pretty much nowhere. His lines about perversion are compelling, but I just don't have enough time with him to really feel its full effect. And then he is also dispatched pretty easily and quickly. I started to really like Malcolm toward the end of the novel, but once again, just hadn't had nearly enough of it. I really wish we had gotten more time with all these characters that feel intriguing or fun, but just do not get that time to grow and bloom properly. To go back to the ending, I feel like this is what bothered me the most. Everything is just tied up a little too neatly and quickly. It is essentially just, ah yes, everyone kept their word. Case never saw Molly again after she left one night. He found a new girlfriend and work. The end. Like, we get to know a bit about how the AI ended up, but I want to know more about everything else. Turing just never caught on again. I know their criminal records were erased, but 3 of their agents literally got murdered. No one ever follows up on that. We don't get to learn even a little bit about where Molly went. Yeah, we know she probably just went back to work, but I'd like to know a bit more specifics than that. I also wish we got to see a bit more of what happened with her in Case immediately afterwards, how long it took her to leave. Not to mention, I would like to know what happened with Xeon and Malcolm, with Freeside and Teshir Ashpool. We already know one of the major revelations involving the AI, but I'd like to know if anything else in the world got influenced. I know Neuromancer is part of a trilogy, so I hope that the other books hint at, or just let us know about some of those things. Though I doubt Case at the least will be returning, as Gibson made the end of Neuromancer feel very final for his character. Lastly, to tie in with the ending, with the normal brutality of the genre, and how much Gibson sets up this world to be dog eat dog, it surprised me that pretty much everyone just kept their word in this book at the end. The big super AI actually just gives them the rewards. The trillionaire 3 Jane is one of the more helpful characters in the book, and just shows them empathy. It just feels questionable to me that things would wrap up so nicely. It feels almost antithetical to the usual themes of the genre. Neuromancer has very much earned its place as the foundation of cyberpunk. It is a piece you read and start to see its influence everywhere, managing to still feel not too cliche, despite so much of it becoming standards for the genre. Gibson excels at world building in prose the most, and while some parts of it do feel very 80s or 90s cyberpunk, much of it feels timeless. It is a book that will stick to me alongside its characters. Even if you have made it this far, and have now learned some spoilers, it is still more than worth a read or listen. Those have been my thoughts and feelings about Neuromancer. I'll see you next time. What's on the agenda today? Oh, what are you doing in there? What's on the agenda today? What the hell are you doing in there? Jack.